since that the husband is responsible for the wife's sins and that the king is responsible for the faults of his counselors. In each case, we see the seriousness of responsibility. A spiritual master must consistently guide his disciplines so that they will come to a higher platform. Otherwise, he will certainly be held accountable and suffer for their sins. A husband's duty is to protect, hide, and care for his wife. If he fails in that duty, his wife's sins fall upon him. Similarly, one who is in a leadership position, anyone dealing with the lives of dependents is held karmically accountable. If people could really understand the accountability associated with leadership, most would be reluctant to hold such a position. Although much of modernity is based on people thinking that they are units unto themselves, community means seeing our interdependence. We each have an integral role in the function and success of society. Many people these days are trying to avoid the responsibilities and implications of community without realizing that community is actually a great part of a natural order of things. When there is a cheating mentality prevalent in the government, that mentality will be passed on to the people. There is a story in the Vedas concerning a king and his pious Brahmana advisor named Bhagwan Pandita. While other ministers try to make their fortune by exploiting the king, Bhagavan Pandita maintained his Brahminical detachment. Therefore, the other ministers hated him. His presence interfered with their ability to manipulate and cheat. For this reason, they conspired to minimize Bhagavan Pandita's influence. Perhaps they should kill him, they thought. In the end, they decided that he must be removed from the king's service as chief advisor, perhaps by having him banished from the kingdom. In the Vedic system, a king would rule for life unless he became mentally incapacitated. The king, however, appointed ministers and their posts were always temporary, depending on the king's needs. Thus, the ministers often feared losing their positions. Aside from the ministers, the king was always advised by Brahmins who remained free of official position, who were not materialistic, and who were never engaged in partisan politics. One day, the ministers had a gatekeeper tell Bhagwan Pandita that the king did not want to see him again and that he was no longer welcome in the kingdom. Because of this, the youthful Pandita left the kingdom of his own volition. After several days, the king began to ask for him. Some of the plotting ministers constructed a false story saying he had died of a heart attack. The king was shocked to hear this news. He called in the palace doctor to learn more about Bhagavan Pandita's death. The doctor was also part of the minister's plot, so he confirmed that the Pandita had died from the heart failure. After this, the king was convinced. He decided to reciprocate if some way with a loyal and sensitive service Bhagavan Pandita had rendered while he was alive. Accordingly, he decided to send a donation to the Pandita's widow. He appointed one of the ministers to deliver the money, but the minister instead took the money and divided it between himself and the other ministers involved in the plot. At that time, Bhagavan Pandita tried to gain entrance into the palace, but to no avail. The ministers were quite powerful. One day, while the king was out of walking in the city, Bhagwan Pandita took the opportunity to try to meet the king. The guards, of course, were aware of this might happen, so they remained vigilant and did not allow Bhagavan Pandita to get close to the king. Finally, Bhagavan Pandita looked to see what direction the king was walking in. He ran ahead and climbed at the tree. As the king was about to pass under the tree, Bhagavan Pandita began to shout, Maharaja, Maharaja, it's me, your old friend, Bhagavan Pandita. Bhagavan was shouting out so desperately that the king looked up and saw his old friend in the tree. The king immediately walked over the tree, but the ministers quickly approached him and said, "Don't go there, your highness, it's the ghost of Bhagavan Pandita." At first, the king was bewildered. Then he saw that all his ministers were in agreement. Yes, he thought, it's a ghost. My ministers have saved me. The point of the story is to show how people often accept false theories and innocently become part of a culture of manipulation and lying. When the king does not monitor his citizens sufficiently and does not have a strong system for dealing with social deviation, the kingdom will be overrun by thieves, rajas, and cheaters. The common people will not only be attacked and abused by such cheaters, but in time they themselves will become cheaters. We see this all too often in today's society, for we have become a society of the cheaters and the cheated.
Thank you. Any reflections from anybody on this section? The accountability section to me really reminded me of the principle that we've been talking about, the leader knowing their constituents or who they lead, like as though a mother knows her child. And this was one of the principles that it reminded me of. Did anyone else have any thoughts or reflections?
Yeah, I think it's the title accountability as a leader. In this context, it's in the context of a king, but I think in our world today, it could very well be parent. It could be political leaders, and so many different examples are popping up. So just like the last paragraph, kind of felt like a bit. I was just hoping he would get up and see his friend, but he never did. He was like, "Oh, he's a ghost." Okay, but like, how much? Like, there's something there about also the king trusting his people to a certain degree, right? So, at what point does a king, like, or a leader become somewhat so entrusting of others that you actually, the lines become so blurred you don't see where something's out of line? And there's probably early telling signs and symptoms, but they get stepped over. But in terms of examples, when I was last in India before this recent trip was 2015, and I was speaking to somebody I know, like not fairly well, but they are a relative. And I think we were connecting for the first time as adults after like many childhood trips. And they were just talking about how there was some like tax evasion that they were like involved in, but it was the norm. Like, it's the norm for those small to medium enterprises or business holders to be involved in doing business in that style. And his reasoning and rationale seems so logical, right? But it's probably like everybody follows that, right? It's convenient to them. And like, to have to do something the way it's legally set up is a gross inconvenience to them as they're occurring of it. And therefore they kind of bend the rules and create their own norms. And so is that cheating and lying? And they would argue and say, of course not. Like, the actual system is so broken that it doesn't serve us to follow it. And we hear that time and time again. And so I feel like the book talks about morals and values that are optimal. And at the same time, we're living in a world right now where human beings have created their own interpretation of what's in, like, how you operate from integrity. And unless like leaders really have clear agreements in place, whether it's for family or a nation or the world. Human beings are just left to their own interpretation based on their own consciousness, which is, I think, where all the grayness comes in the way.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, such a great point you're making. And if there are any other comments, please share. But I had a kind of an application exercise that comes from a previous discussion we've had, but I wanted to bring that up in context to this topic of accountability.
I just was thinking on the actually also this reflection part and where you get your feedback. I think that is with more, I don't know, duty you overtake or the also official power is, it's really getting kind of difficult to get the feedback or a fear feedback. So just like how to create the system where you can check it up, and that's would be kind of, it just make me think by reading that. Yeah, that's Article 6. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that system of feedback is really important, and who we have as our, I call our circle of trust is also something to always think about, because it's the king probably, the reason why he had the advisors is that, the people who were more spiritually inclined, they were less attached to giving good feedback all the time. So they'd be able to tell the king the truth, or at least some information that's relevant to them, whether it's gonna, pump them up or sometimes ground them. And I think it's always really important to have those people in our lives that can ground us as well. I wanted us to just jump into an exercise, and this is coming from, if people remember, this is coming from a discussion that we had in Yoga in the Dark Night of the Soul, because I thought this was really relevant to this section. So this is pretty much a summary of chapter 16 in the Gita. And the chapter 16 of the Gita, it basically talks about our good side and our bad side, right? So we've talked about this before, that all of us have this fight within, like, of the good dog and the bad dog. And the reason I'm bringing this up at this point is because I was thinking that if as leaders, we often are looking to work on skills, but we don't sometimes look at how we're trying to improve our character. And so this section in the chapter 16, it looks at kind of what's our higher nature and what's our lower nature. And I wanted to really take the opportunity. People probably remember the slide from before, but our higher nature is considered the wealth of gods. So literally in the Bhagavad Gita, the title of this chapter is Divine and Demoniac. So it's quite very strong in its language. But I wanted people, if people could take maybe a screenshot of what they see here, because you're going to just take a moment to reflect on these, because these are in fact all of the higher qualities that we, should be striving for. So just let me know when you've kind of at least, and if you don't, I can put it back up again. But then similarly, there's also our lower nature and things that sometimes can override our sense of integrity, so to speak. And so I wanted to bring these forward because we all have experienced these within ourselves. And the first part of this exercise is really just, I think of character, and I've heard this somewhere, but I'm forgetting the source, but character is who you are when others are not watching. And so I wanted us to take this opportunity right now to, at least from both the wealth of the gods and the wealth of the wealth of the ungodly. I wanted us to right now just look at the qualities and to at least acknowledge the qualities that we've taken time to develop from this list of qualities, and then also look at the ones potentially in this section, the wealth of the ungodly, the ones that still what we can honestly say within ourselves potentially have a grip. And again, going back to this idea of accountability, I think of the, whatever domain we may be leading in, we give, we're giving to others what we have, right? And that also includes maybe sometimes our not so refined side and our lower nature. And so this is really an opportunity just to take these, one, first to do the inventory of what we feel like we've cultivated. The second is then also looking at the ones that potentially still have a grip on us, or things that we maybe potentially even do when others are not watching and that we want to shine the light on. So the first part is taking the inventory. And then after that, again, in the same way, we've taken time to cultivate certain good qualities, but then we also want to shine the light on maybe one or two things we'd like to, again, take time to shine the light on and look at more closely in our life, because this is really what I feel, if we're really always looking at our character, this is what's going to strengthen our leadership in all capacities in the future. So does everyone have an idea of what we're trying to do, or does anyone have any questions? All right, looks like people have already jumped into it. So if people want these lists, but essentially what we're doing is we're looking at what the Bhagavad Gita has listed qualities of our higher self, and then qualities of our lower side that overtake us. We're trying to take an inventory of both the ones that we've cultivated, because again, we've said character is who you are when others are not watching.
Ricken, could you please put the first list back up for a minute? Thanks.
This list is always an inspiring one to look at, and again, related to Ambika's point, it's nice to go back to the ancient wisdom texts and see what characteristics are important as a grounding point. Otherwise, everyone's
What
just...
if you're not doing the exercises?
Say again?
You're doing the exercises? Oh. Sorry, I was speaking to Ronnie across the desk.
No problem.
So Ricken, I have a question. You know, as we list the qualities or question slash observation that still have grip on us when others are not watching, I think the ones absent in one naturally are present in two, in addition to the ungodly qualities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're saying what we're lacking in the first category show up in part two.
In this, yeah, just naturally.
Right.
So say, for example, aversion to fault finding, but I guess that would come under harshness, maybe. Like in the first list. So a few things that I saw that are that aren't consistently present for me here automatically become
Mhm.
like in subgrouped into or categorized in the second one anyways.
Yeah, and therefore one way of looking at, and I was gonna, this is what I wanted to talk about is, how we plan to, focus on these. But one way you could look at it is instead of focusing on the negative, we could just focus on the positive to displace the negative, right? In the one sense that if you're cultivating the positive naturally, just by the matter of displacement, the not so positive or the less desirable quality eventually is displaced out or has shows up less in our day-to-day life. That's it. Would you be thinking of that as one approach?
Yeah, I actually love that approach and the way you've just framed it, because all too often when we say when we talk about areas of development or muscle to build, it's, for example, like literally picking words from the wealth of the ungodly, then it's anger, harshness, egotism, arrogance, right? But instead of that and focusing on the negatives, like replacing it with positives to create the displacement would be then a version of fault finding, which is actually a really refreshing and great way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel that the wealth of the ungodly or the lower nature, is there for us to acknowledge, but I think the most constructive way of trying to approach it is, starting from the place of inspiration rather than a place of, because if overly meditating on these qualities can also maybe discourage us as well, because we know, if we're honest in some capacity, maybe all 6 of these qualities are within us from time to time. Ed, how are you doing?
Great to see you guys.
So Ed, what we did was we read this section on accountability, and then I had an exercise where I wanted to, accountability of the leader. Oftentimes we focus on skills we want to develop, but I was looking at developing character. And so we had this exercise where we took basically chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is divine and demoniac, which acknowledges that we have a higher and lower side.
Mm-hmm.
And this is essentially a discussion we had from Yoga in the Dark Night of the Soul. But basically, I just define character as who we are when others are not watching. And we're just taking the opportunity to shine the light. People are just taking an inventory for themselves of areas that they've developed within themselves and areas that they would like to shine the light on.
Wonderful exercise.
So maybe if people have had a few minutes to look at it, what I wanted to kind of take forward is, Ed, and maybe you can help us with this, but oftentimes we will look at things that we want to improve within ourselves, especially when it comes to qualities or character.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to see is how we don't necessarily have to focus on the details of which quality is, but how we plan to create that system by which we can. So I wanted just to work on more of the how and the plan, and if people had any ideas for how they were going to go about doing this, because otherwise then it just becomes something we'll just put off to the side. So really just trying to create a system by which we can take to apply this further and take it on as an exercise for us to dive into.
Paul, how do you
Anyone have
start?
any? Please, Paul.
So I'm going to use an actual example because any core strength can also be a core weakness. So
Please.
I believe my core strengths is attention to detail and looking for results. But in one of the qualities that I'd like to develop and increase my wealth on is aversion to fault finding. So it's sort of into your question, Rickon, of how do I get a system to create that? I think you mentioned the answer earlier in terms of just focus on the opposite. So I am an attention to detail person, and I often tell people, if there's a needle in a haystack, I'll find it. Not because I'm looking for it, but because it's there. And then once it's there, it bothers me and I have to get rid of it. So that's kind of how I do things. But I think that if I were to just focus on the solution, so how do I, let's not talk about the needle, why it's there and so on, but let's talk about, okay, so the needle's there, why don't we just figure out how to fix it and make it better? So flip it. I don't know though. I don't know if that's answering the question.
Yeah, so you're basically just saying whatever you're seeing as something that's not so desirable, basically focus on the opposite.
Focus on the desired outcome. So
Okay.
Instead of focusing on the fault, focus on the solution.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good way to look at it. Now, if you've identified what the opposite is, I guess to even peel the layer further, has anyone thought about what they would try to do to potentially create a way forward? Like you have like maybe a North Star to work towards. But like any skill that requires practice, these qualities and character qualities would also require some degree of practice to become second nature. Ed, do you have anything to share on a how or a system by which we can look at character qualities?
Yeah, yes. There's some different types of research on this topic. One of the key factors, and this is also very, very strongly advocated in the Vedic or Eastern teaching, is to consciously seek out people who have the traits or characteristics that we would like to develop. So I remember B.T. Swami spoke about this once, and it's a bit of a subtle science, but he explained that, and this is something that society is slowly coming to understand more and more. In many ancient traditions, they talk about auras, right? The idea that you have an energy field around you, and there's a type of technology, camera actually called, and you can look this up. It's called Kirlian photography. So it's a specially calibrated camera which can take a picture of the biomagnetic field around a living organism. So whether it's an animal or a particular plant or a human being, it can literally take an image of the biomagnetic field around the body. So what they call traditionally the aura. So when we spend time around people who have certain qualities or characteristics, and we do so in a mood of receptivity, it can help us to appreciate in a very dynamic way that particular attribute or quality, and it can help us therefore to develop that quality on the proviso that we have respect for that person. That's a very interesting part that you don't normally hear. If you respect the good qualities a person has, you develop them, actually, But if you have negative thinking towards a person's good qualities, you actually, as Rickon implied, you actually tend to develop negative qualities. Too much meditation on a person's bad qualities without a compassionate and detached view of it. So detached means I see it, okay? Compassionate means I see it with a view towards helping them, not a view towards bringing them down. You see, if someone has those elements in place, you're not so affected by other people's qualities, but you can see it at the same time, and you can also uplift the person, or you're more likely to be able to uplift the person. So yeah, so one technique to Rickin's direct question is to spend time, respectful time, or even just to meditate on another person's good qualities. Yeah, and you can do this in what we call a global way. So you can think about the good quality itself. You can think about how it helps them and how it could potentially help you. In other words, if I was more like this, my life would be more like this and less like this. I've come to New York. There's a special, there's the Princeton University, which is where B.T. Swami went to study. They're arranging a memorial program today in his honor, and they're going to actually have some kind of memorial stone to kind of just honor his his lifetime achievement. And he was a co-founder at Princeton University of something called the Third World Center, and I think it was a center to kind of help to uplift society or humanity in some way. And so their actual event is taking place in that particular I don't know, with that particular organizational entity that he created or co-founded at Princeton, although it's been renamed. Anyway, the reason why I'm mentioning it is because when I think about what he achieved, he would often speak about this. He'd often speak about associating with the right type of people, and then also praising or recognizing their good qualities and seeing how it helps you. If I'm like this, what will be the change in my life? So when I came here, I got picked up from the airport. So I'm staying with a friend, and it's whole family. They're really, really wonderful family. So the person who picked me up from the airport, I think the last time we'd seen each other was about about 17 years ago, 17, 18 years ago. So we were in a place called Gitanagri. I think a few of you went there for this retreat. So anyway, we were speaking, and his character's just, he's got such a strong sense of self. I mean, a really strong sense of self. And I was just thinking about that. Because he has such a strong sense of self, he's very clear on what he believes. He's very clear on why. We were discussing this on the way from the airport. He was telling me, he said, I can be around any group of people and appreciate any group of people without losing a sense of my own identity. And I just thought that's a very, very strong, and he's 37 years old, and I was just thinking it's such a great quality to have, it's
Powerful.
very powerful quality.
Yeah, it's really
And
powerful.
so you can do this as an exercise if you want at some point, where you just kind of tune into a particular quality that someone has, something that you would desire to have. And then you can just complete this question. If I had more of this quality, because there's always degrees, it's a nuanced thing. If I had more of this quality, then this is how it would positively impact my life. There will be more of X, Y, and Z, something desirable. There will be less of A, B, and C, something that I don't want, okay? Some people, for example, if they were more patient, there would be more understanding, empathy, and support from their network, and there would be less conflict, less frustration, less irritability in their relationships. So you can kind of do a similar thing, because it helps you to tune into what's in it for you. And when I know the goal, when I know the benefit that I can get by having that quality, it can give me the inspiration to keep practicing it even in difficult times. Anyway, there's one other exercise I'll share very quickly is, and Rick inspired, you inspired me in this when some of the things that you were saying when I first joined the call. You can think of, what do I need to remove in order to have more of a good thing? Okay. What do I need to remove in order to have more of a good thing? So if I want to have better organization, then I need to remove, let's see, a lack of structure from my life. Okay. So if I want to be more organized, what do I need to remove? I think about myself, for example. Sometimes I've seen that I can be more organized if I've got less on. if my schedule is back to back, there's less room for thinking. And for me, if I've got space to think, it makes it very easy to be organized. So in order to be more organized, I mean, this is more like a competency than a character trait, but just to give an example, if I want to be more organized, I need to have more space, which means I take less on in the day. So instead of having 20 things, I've got 10. And because I've got 10, it's more manageable because that's within my capacity to organize. But if I took on 20, it'll be chaotic. Okay. Ronnie, I saw you had your hand up, so I'll stop there. What did you want to share, please?
Sorry, one I wanted to share was, thanks so much, Ed and Rikin, for that context. I think firstly, one is just a statement that I kind of observe and somewhat agree with, but I've not really understood the underlying science or explanation. And second is a question, which is, I think we often hear people say that the more we like desist what some way of being that our mom was or our dad was, a nagging way, the more we kind of resist that, we grow up tending to find those things happening in us, that we're behaving more and more like them, the things that we didn't like about them. And I've experienced that myself, which is something that I continually like make my mom wrong for or condemn her for around organization skills or timekeeping or panicking when there's a big dinner or event that needs to happen. The more I call her out on that over the years, the more I find I tend to show up that way in certain areas and arenas, right? And so the thing that I desist or loathe in somebody, I start to see aspects of it in me, or I show up that way for other people, right? When my mom's not around. So that's one thing that shows up for me, which is those negative traits when the ones that we don't want to avoid. And secondly, the question is, when you say, look at somebody who, like, what have they got that if I had, what would that make available for me, right? When does, or is there any such thing as, when does looking at that other person's traits, like being like them, when does that become some form of idolatry and maybe unhealthy? Like you idolize somebody too much, that you put them too high on a pedestal, and by virtue put yourself too low. And you also create some form of imposter syndrome, right? And then you feel, well, I'll never be that good because I don't have that. I'm not this. And sometimes you find that polarizes you from being like those people who have those traits that you admire.
Who's that question directed to? Is it Rikin?
Well, to you, Ed, as in just on the point you were saying, that, about the positive traits, that look at what's there. And if I put those in my schedule, what would I have? But also, like today in the world of, say, Instagram, social media, where we're creating content and your reach is, how you grow, how it becomes a livelihood or a business. We go into comparison of somebody that, they're doing really well, and rightly so, and then they have a large following, as an example. And you go into questioning, well, what do I need to tweak or alter to equally grow and launch my business? And at some point, it goes into from observing to learn and admire to maybe it's toxic in the sense that now it demeans you or polarizes you from those people.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, first of all. So I've thought about this. I thought about this in the past. I'll give you the visual that helps me to understand this. You see, there's two things. So let's say that you're in a house, and let's say that you're in a room and you want to get into your attic. Okay, so there's above you. Actually, yeah, so let's say you want to get into the loft. It's above you. So you're in the room, you're at a certain floor, right? So you're standing on the ground, but there's also a ladder that you can take up to the loft. So there's a few things. When we start to get to the point where we're looking up in a way that's demeaning us, it means that we're not standing firmly on some kind of baseline platform of healthy self-respect. You see? So what's happening is I'm respecting this person And actually there are two actions going on simultaneously. I'm respecting the positives of this person, but I'm actually also looking at myself and eroding my own positives. That's actually what's happening. So it's not the admiration of a good quality that's causing the issue. It's the comparison and the denigration of our bad qualities simultaneously that's causing the issue. So when there's healthy admiration, then I do implicitly, there should always be two things going on in this area. There should be self-respect and respect for others. I did this first podcast with my wife, and it was called the self-esteem spectrum. Maybe we'll do that on another occasion. And then we were talking about how when people have healthy relationships, what does it mean? It means simultaneously there's two ingredients going on. There's respect for myself and respect for the other person. Okay, it's interesting. When I was coming from the airport, we were discussing this, and the driver was making this point. He said sometimes what people do in the name of admiring other people, they neglect themselves, and eventually the whole situation falls apart. Because admiring others is no problem, that's healthy. But the difficulty is when subconsciously, it often happens subconsciously, when I'm also wearing myself down, denigrating myself. That's the problem. That's the acid. You see? So what you want to do in order to look up and grow, you have to both take care of yourself while also appreciating other people. When the two ingredients are there, it doesn't go into that toxic space. When the two ingredients are there, it doesn't become an erosion of your own self-value. In fact, when there's healthy interactions, especially if you interact with people who have admirable qualities and they are healthy, they also inspire and lift you up. So that's the best kind of association. So you're dealing with people so we sometimes met, Radha Swami, and I think, so I know Ambika, I think she's just left the call, but I know Ambika very much admires, people like very powerful spiritual personalities like Radha Swami. If you interact with someone like that, he has all these great qualities, but he simultaneously makes you feel valued. You see? So that's the model actually to follow. You're nurturing your own foundation. In other words, back to the analogy, you're standing on firm ground yourself. That's your healthy self-esteem. And at the same time as standing on firm ground, step by step with the ladder, you're ascending. That's the admiration and the working towards better qualities, you see? So what I would suggest that you're talking about is when I'm admiring or looking up to others, but my own grounding isn't firm. And it's the grounding that's not firm, that's the problem. It's not actually coming from the admiration of others. It means the healthy self-esteem isn't there, which is why when I see the good qualities of others, I'm subconsciously thinking, oh, I'm lesser than, I'm lesser than, I'm lesser than. But the actual proper internal dialogue is, I'm seeing the good qualities of others. I recognize that I've come a long way, and also I can also elevate myself through that kind of recognition. How does that sound to you, Ronnie?
No, it sounds really good. And I guess what I'm taking away from this is really not to, or to remind ourselves, like you say, like how far we've come.
Absolutely.
And also what are those attributes that are, we have a greater propensity to perform or yield result in that may or may not be with another, and not to like neglect or forget those as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's very insightful. And I think, it's about treading that middle path, learning what to admire and seek and learn from another that we can implement.
Yes.
And it's not about polarizing then from neglecting what you already have, what's already good and unique about you, your swabhav, right? And not ditching that.
And one thing on that, if we don't have both ingredients, it can often make our admiration of others toxic. B.T. Swami, I heard this in one class. He said that when you meet some people who are so much like, oh, I think you're so great. He said he can feel when it's imbalanced. you know, when it's over the top, you know, because that's a sign that the person hasn't got that middle path that you spoke about, Ronnie. So first they'll project they'll project all their good qualities onto another person. And then in doing that, they'll feel like, oh, I'm now feeling like I'm less than the other person. Then they'll eventually become resentful of that other person. In other words, you've put the person on a pedestal. So now we have to tear that person down because we've neglected, like you said, we've neglected recognition of how far we've come. So it's the imbalance which makes it temporary. But when it's done in a healthy way, I love and value myself, so I'm grounded. Therefore, I can also admire you properly, and then we can hold that relationship where there's mutual growth and mutual respect. Mutual respect is a model of relationship that lasts. Respecting other people while neglecting or disrespecting ourselves, it's temporary, so it will eventually cause some kind of crisis and some kind of breakdown. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that also that, you know, one lesson that comes out of the Bhagavad Gita that's mentioned twice, and we've talked about it before, is this idea of you know, Krishna talks about this idea of staying in our own lane, where if we, you know, basically what comparison can do is that it can lead to us striving for, you know, things that may be not true to ourselves. So the stronger we have kind of that value and that respect for ourselves, it also allows us to appreciate others and, you know, where they may be or what they have. At the same time, also knowing that not getting distracted, which is sometimes very easy in today's world, about, you know, where we should be. So I just wanted to bring that point up, that it's mentioned twice in the Bhagavad Gita. You know, Krishna talks about not, you know, sticking to what we do is more important than potentially even doing something else that someone else does better, right? And it just comes back to this point of, I think it comes back to this point that Ed was just mentioning of authenticity, but that also comes from really just having a deep value and respect for who we are and where we're at. Does that make sense, Ronnie, in terms of just?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I think it's a thing that often comes up for us in conversation between Ambi and I, but also what you say is around, like, to compare a skill set where that's not our natural forte to somebody else where it's their natural forte could easily have you diminish you, right? Like if you're not great in sales and you're good in organizational stuff, strategy, operations, and you're comparing to the person in sales, like it's a great way to diminish you, or vice versa, right? Yeah, and I think those, I can't remember where recently we're looking at the psychology behind being celebrity struck, you know, where you're like awestruck with celebrity, right? And what is the cause of that? What is the source of that? And how is that good for you or bad for you? Because Ambi's had it, like if Amitabh Bachchan walked in our wedding day, she was going to get up and walk off and, you know, head towards him. So, you know, I'm hoping 10 years on, this is going to serve her to not walk off when he does walk into a room.
Ambika, you had something to share.
And on that note, guys, I do have to leave in 2 minutes, so I'm not dropping because of the conversation where we're at. I have my other call coming.
I just wanted to say, you know, Ed, this is such a powerful point, and I think it's taken me so long to get to it, because 4 years or maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I interviewed you. Oh, have we lost Ed? He's frozen. I think he may have dropped.
His camera's off.
Yeah. But I'd done an interview with Ed, and we had probably 80 guests on that masterclass, and it was around some aspect of relationships. I thought the conversation went really. Hey, Ed, welcome back.
Thanks.
Hey, I was just sharing. This conversation is so insightful and value adding, and I feel like it's been such a journey. Just this very specific topic for me personally, And 3 to 4 years ago, I did an interview with you, which is on relationships or some aspect of it. And I had invited you as a guest. And we had about 80 people that showed up on that masterclass. And I was just in such awe of everything Ed said that most of the people who came on were people who had done our programs or watched our lives or my stories, whatever. And one of my closest mates, who's also one of our coaches, at the end of the interview, I was buzzing. I was like, how was it? And she was like, what happened to you? Like, I didn't experience you at all in that conversation. You were just so starstruck that I didn't get to experience any part of Ambika in that conversation because you were so like in awe of your guest speaker. Which is so interesting and it truly was that experience that Ronnie's talking about, right? And for those of you that weren't aware of the name he mentioned, he's just one of the biggest Bollywood stars ever for the last 40, 50 years. But my experience was, Ed, of somebody who's such a spiritual leader, and I'm had my full student hat on. And then that mark always stayed with me because there was full, I was not in that conversation, and I was just yearning to learn more from you. And I think over the years, and this past week, we hosted a series of Theosophical Society events, more on spirituality locally. And I emceed/facilitated many of the conversations, but there was just such a stillness and a freedom to contribute and listen and learn and at the same time share, which I think it's been a journey getting there. But as you're sharing this specific point, I feel like there's been some growth in that area for me personally. And I know in the past, it was very much putting somebody up at a pedestal, but not, and definitely coming from an incomplete state myself.
Ricky, you gonna say
Thanks.
something? No, please.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say to Ambika, thank you for sharing that reflection, because it's really nice that you're able to witness the progression for yourself. I feel like that's a very it's always a very empowering thing for oneself. But I also feel that when you share it, it also gives a permission for others to be able to do that self-reflection on their progression as well. And overall boost everyone's sense of self-esteem. So thank you.
I'll just add to that. So in the in one Vedic literature called the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, and B.T. Swami mentions this in different places in the Leadership 2 book. It explains about the different types of relationships. So we have various, in a healthy society, we have various relationships with people. There'll be some relationships where we're dealing with people who, whether it's because of age or expertise, they may be like a senior. There'll be those who we relate to in a given way where we're more like peers, and those who we relate to in a given way where we're more like, we're the senior for them, so they're like juniors. So all three dynamics are necessary, but if they're healthy, they always elevate, which is the point that Ambika, you were making. So, you know, we even if we think about the relationship between parents and children, if the parents are good parents, what do? They bring that child up to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. You see, that's the whole point. So if it's a healthy senior, they bring people up, they raise people so that those people come to that healthy expression themselves. So there will always be those different dynamics, but the key thing to determine whether they're healthy or not is the orientation progressive. You see, you also have unhealthy forms of each. You have people who are in a senior position, they want to keep people down, right? They want to kind of minimize people or exploit people. That's the unhealthy form of a senior. You have the unhealthy form of a peer where there's where rather than there being friendship, there's a kind of toxic competition. So the peers are trying to get one over on each other or exploit each other. And then there's the unhealthy expression in terms of juniors, where the junior projects in such a way that they become a dependent rather than an assistant, you see? So each of these relationships have their healthy and their unhealthy expression, but all three dynamics always exist in any kind of community. I was speaking to someone recently how B.T. Swami said, you can't have a community without elders. It's very interesting. When so in New York, some other students of B.T. Swami, Ricky knows them actually, Madhavacharya Kunti. So Radha Swami asked them to be more involved with New York. He actually told them to do that. And I thought that's a stroke of genius, because if you met these people, they're like the archetype parental figures, like motherly, fatherly. They're just very loving, kind, accepting, compassionate. So you feel like when you're around them, you feel like, wow, they're just so lovable. You know, they're just so, but in a very parental way, very protective way. You know, it's like the mother, it's like the ideal mother or the ideal father. And in this stuff that I'm working on, I told you I was working on completing my book. One of the things I'm writing in the book, and it was a great realization that I had, you see, the trouble we have in our modern society is you can even have people in the senior position, right? So you can have people who are seniors, but they don't have the position of a senior, right? So let's say you had someone, and you see this a lot in modern society, you have someone who's an elder, but they don't have the position of an elder, meaning, or let's say, actually, let's give a better example. They don't have the capacity of an elder. So they're older, they're mature, but they've got no time for anyone. You see, they're very, very busy. So it's like you have this very mature person who's very loving and kind, but because they're busy, no one gets the benefit of that because they're just running around all the time. Maybe they've got so many things to do. So what you need for society to work, and this is how it was more traditionally, you have someone who's got the nature of an elder. They've also got the capacity of an elder. You see, so they've got the character of being mature, wise, compassionate, loving, protective, parental, and they're situated in their life where they've actually got the time to pass that on to other people. You see, and they've got the willingness to do it. Otherwise, what happens is sometimes you have people who've got the form of an elder. They've got an older body, they've been around a lot, but they're just bitter, angry, resentful. You know, life has just made them a bit resentful. And so they don't have the character, they've got the form of an elder, but they don't have the character of an elder. So people don't get that they don't get what they should from an older person. They don't get that wisdom, experience, time, encouragement. It's just the body's old. You understand what I'm trying to say? So it's like form, but not substance. And that's what we often have in modern society. And that's why society sometimes breaks down. Because people like, we need those loving parental figures. We need real friendship. And we need people to share with as well. Juniors who we can share our experience, because we grow by sharing as well. But so often in modern society, it's the form, but not the substance. So you can have someone who's junior, but it's just like, you know, why do I need to listen to you? And you can understand it because sometimes they've had bad experiences with senior people, right? So they're junior in experience, but they don't have the openness and the receptivity of a junior. Or again, you have the form of a friend, socially peers, but there isn't that let's mutually help each other and be open and honest and reveal our mind, you know? Or you have the form of an elder, but actually that person doesn't want to bring up the next generation. They just want to be a bit bitter, or they just want to make that younger person like, you know, someone that they can manipulate or control. So that's where the problem comes. That's where the problems come from. Yeah, just wanted to share that point.
Thank you, Ed. Rasa, did you have something to share?
Yes, I just was appreciating what Ed just mentioned, because when I was thinking of this exercise, and specifically, you know, who do I want to be around? It's around people who have wisdom, because, you know, to Ambika's point, you know, I consider myself, you know, a person that has a lot of work to do still. And so the idea, and, you know, also living in modern society, we're so programmed. I mean, obviously I have a sales background. We're so programmed to be competitive. We're so programmed to, you know, want to excel, want to win, you know, outdo the other person, you know, be the better person, so forth. And so, you know, part of my growth has been to come to a place of, like you said, having that foundation, that idea of self-acceptance for, you know, all the work that I've done, all the progress that I've made, and all the, you know, work that I still have to do. And coming to a place of wanting to imbibe wisdom from others and grow through that. So to your point, it's not about you know, just admiring anything and anything, because, you know, I mean, obviously that's a positive thing, but for me, it's more about admiring the wisdom in others and wanting to imbibe that. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, Ressa, the point that you're making, I think it's really this idea of appreciating where the qualities that we want to integrate. I think it's great for, I always use it for motivation to head in that direction, because you have, you know, you have kind of an example of what that looks like in real life. Because I think, you know, it takes the words in a book and makes it reality. And I think, you know, at the same time, we just have to be grounded in where we're at, and as mentioned, you know, like step by step climb the ladder.
Yeah, it's such an important point, just to add to what Rikin said. In admiring others and aspiring to be better ourselves, we shouldn't put ourselves down. That's when it becomes toxic. That's the erosion, you know. And so often when people talk about this topic in a healthy way, what's implicit, and this is something I'm telling you honestly, I found this to be incredibly useful and transformative in my own life. And I got this from studying literature such as the Bhagavatam. I more and more in my studies of wisdom, I try to look at what's implicit, you see. So I'll give you a little bit of a preview. One of the things I write about in this book that I'm working on, I try to understand what are the essential principles for a healthy relationship. And so since this came up today, there are at least 3 key characteristics, and everything else hangs off this. One is a healthy self-respect or self-care. Okay, so I'm giving to myself. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is a healthy respect for other people. Okay, and then point number 3 is a willingness to serve, because service is the bridge between myself and another person. And what I write about in my book is how, if you carefully study all relationship seminars, courses and workshops, they all hinge on different techniques and philosophies around these 3 characteristics. You see? So if it's a healthy technique in relationship, it's just an expansion or an expression of one of these 3 ingredients. So what I try and do in the book is to get to the root of it. You know, there's a wonderful saying in the literature called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It says, essential truth, concisely spoken, is true eloquence. So I try to get down what's the essential truth, because otherwise you can read books and there's seminars, there's courses, there's websites, and there's a million different techniques and ideas and all this kind of stuff. So I try to get what's the essence, because then it's easy to remember. And then in any relationship, you can just look at 3 things. Okay, am I respecting myself properly? Self-care, self-understanding. Am I respecting the other person properly, right? And is there a willingness to serve, a willingness to give? And in the book, one of the things I'm toying with is some exercises in the book where you get people to evaluate these 3 ingredients that you have in any relationship. Because if you get these 3, you know, you can immediately see why a relationship is failing. So some relationships, and this goes back to what Ronnie said, there's huge respect for the other person, admiration, appreciation. But, and this is why I did the analysis with Ronnie's question. But while respecting the other person, the person doesn't look after themselves properly. And therefore it's not balanced. And therefore some things start to erode, you see? But it's not eroding because of the admiration and respect for the other person. It's eroding because I'm lacking I'm lacking having that for myself, you see? Or other relationships, the person has too much concern for themselves and not enough concern for the other person. I think we've sometimes seen that, you know? So again, it's problematic. Or it's like, I really care for myself and I respect the other person, but there's no giving. And it could be because we're not spending time together. We're not spending quality time together, right? Or other things are more of a priority for me than this other person. So then the relationship is weak because the willingness to give, the act of giving, isn't there in the relationship. So I've tried to work through and boil things down to what are the essential ingredients. And I call this a meta model. What I mean by that is you have a model whereby you can go to any relationship seminar, any relationship book, and whatever you're getting in that seminar, you can see how it fits into one of these three categories, right? So you go to a seminar and they tell you, you know, you have to love yourself, you have to take care of yourself, you have to give to yourself. Yeah, that's all part of part one, self-care. Or you go to a seminar and it's like, you know, the reason why your relationships fail is because you don't really understand your partner properly. Yeah, that's all part of respecting the other person, right? Or you go into a relationship seminar and they talk about, you know, do you have mate nights, right? Do you have date nights? Do you have time where you and your partner do things together? Yeah, that's all about the giving to each other. You see? So you can take literally anything in the entire universe of relationship advice and you can hang it on one of these three categories to immediately understand, oh, right, this is a technique to strengthen my self-care, my self-respect. Or these are some philosophies or best practices which help me to understand the other person that I'm in a relationship with better. Or these are techniques around how to give in a relationship. You see? So you can take whatever you've learned and you can fit it in and you can see the strength of the relationship just by looking at the three active ingredients, and immediately you can understand how a relationship is doing or how it could do. And I was doing some reflection on myself, and I saw that where's my strengths. I was trying to refine my brand, but to do it, I'd like to do things from a very authentic place so it stands and lasts. And I realized where I'm strong is clarity on the active ingredients that really make something work. What's the dharma of something, you know? Otherwise, and I write about this also, otherwise you can get overwhelmed with all the different things that you read and hear on the news and in the TV and on the internet and think, you know, like, there's a million techniques, but if you know the essence, then you can immediately understand, right? The keys are X, Y, and Z. You can boil it down to the key essential things. And when you know the essence, you can understand how to express them in different ways as well. Anyway, when the book comes out, you can check it out for yourself. Okay, but that's just a little prelude to some of the things that we write about in the book. Okay, so Ricken, what should we do next?
Well, I guess we're coming closer to the end, but I just wanted to see, does anyone else who hasn't shared anything on anything we've spoken want to reflect or share on any aspect of the conversation? Please, Alicia.
Sure. So I was just taking in what everyone was saying, and it was such a great discussion. But I think one thing that really stood out was when Ambika, when you were telling the story about Ed guest speaking in your call, and you were just like awestruck, and your friend's reflection to you, I thought was so important, because you're probably thinking, oh, everyone just wants to hear Ed and all the wisdom he has to share, which is true. But also, you know, for us to remember that we all have something really important to offer, and that your friend was like, where were you? You know, where was your contribution? But you were thinking, well, no one wants to hear from me. And I thought, you know, that's an experience I could really relate to. And I'm sure all of us have had that experience. So not to forget, especially, you know, I'm sure we'll all be hosting other things and doing things like that in the future. So to remember, even though you may have amazing people kind of around you, that people also want to hear what we have to offer. That was really powerful for me, because I tend to be someone like that who, you know, would look up to other people's qualities and then forget to contribute as well, thinking that no one wants to hear. So I thought that was really, really important. And I love that your friend, that was her takeaway. It was like, well, Ed was great, but like, where are you?
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Alicia, and just this point about encouraging others to value themselves. I think that's, to me, what was coming out in Ambika's story, and you just kind of brought it out again. It's a great service that we can do for others when we see the opportunity.
And I'll just add also, it's part when we are, let's say, a little bit more ahead on the journey in a particular area, because we're all students and we're all teachers, simultaneously in life. Wherever we're in that role, part of the role of that senior or teacher is to transmit value to those people who are coming up the curve. It's an intrinsic part of the role. So if as a senior, we're not doing that for those who are, let's say, new in a particular area or discipline, we're not completely fulfilling that particular position, So seniors are meant to transmit that sense of love, guidance, protection, and nurturing, raising people. That's the whole point. A senior is someone who raises people up, according to the speed that person is ready to go. They raise people up to a higher level. That's the whole point.
And one other thing that I wanted to share is just a practical point from what Ed was saying at the beginning about choosing people who have certain qualities that we want to develop, being around them in a respectful way. I think I've had a lot of time to think about this, how we do it in a practical way. And sometimes we see people that, potentially we don't have access to, or it's hard to, to be able to speak to them personally or spend any time with them. And so one of the things that I really adopted in my life is who are the people that I have access to, but that maybe, that are closer to the people that I would like to spend time with. And just as a very practical point, trying to see if we can surround ourselves even with people who spend a lot of time with mentors and people that we look up to. There's a lot of value in that, because not only have they learned, but it also gives us an opportunity to inquire and ask questions from those individuals who are within our kind of circle of space that we can access, but then also have the opportunity to share a lot of practical wisdom that they've learned from the mentors and the people potentially we can't access as much. So that's something that I've just done personally in my life that has just been that has provided so much value.
Rick, and you've inspired one point, which is that always learning means always growing. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other reflections from Hiba or Christina? Anybody else? One thing that I wanted to encourage is that people would have written down some things that they want to bring forward or develop. I think what would be nice, just in the spirit of the theme being accountability, is that if we could share it with one other person that we're close to, then we may have an accountability partner to help remind us of the things that we don't easily forget it. Because again, it's nice to be able to take what we're discussing and bring it in and apply it. So I just wanted to encourage everyone to maybe at least share it with one other person for that accountability. Usually the easiest person to share it is with someone in their family, just because we are in touch with them on a regular basis. But again, just one other person to share it with, for us to be able to move the needle. Ed, was there anything you wanted to share from, I guess, building off of last week, or even just something for us to look forward to next week?
Yeah, there's there's 3 activities that I was thinking of doing. So I'll just give you a preview actually. So let's see. It's very interesting. Ronnie's question. One activity was called the shadow side, and we were going to look at some of our negative traits, which is, you know, some of the discussion points we had, and start to explore where did they come from, and also what is, you know, what purpose did they serve?
Mhm.
You see, because that's the key part that's missing for many people. So this activity was really looking at this idea of integrating the shadow, you see, because it's not exactly true that we have bad qualities. We have misaligned or wrongly expressed qualities. For example, you know, I saw BT Swami sometimes being very firm, very strong, but that anger has a role to play. You see, anger, people think anger is always bad. And in many cases, if it's misused, it definitely is. But the correct use of anger is a boundary defense. If someone's attacking someone that you love, or let's say your child, you get angry, what does that do? It sends a message that this child, you know, there's a boundary. You can't cross that boundary. So it actually indicates healthy boundary setting. And what they found, I'm not sure if we spoke about this before, but physicians in the medical field have found that when people suppress their anger, and healthy anger, not anger, let's take it back, because there's a lot of unhealthy anger that's expressed in modern society. But when people suppress healthy anger, they simultaneously suppress the immune system. So people who have weak immunity, it sometimes comes from repression of healthy emotions. So what does it mean to be healthy? It means, and BT Swami writes about this in one of his books, Spiritual Warrior 4. There's a whole chapter on anger management, and there's a section called Healthy Anger. So it's when you express the particular emotion at the appropriate time and to the right degree. In fact, when anger is expressed at the appropriate time and to the right degree, it doesn't actually appear as anger. It appears as strength and assertiveness. When it's expressed at the wrong time and to the wrong degree, it appears as unnecessary aggression. You see? So there's assertiveness or strength, healthy expression. Unhealthy expression, it can be over submission, so you're repressing it. And then of course, what happens is it blows up later on, or it can appear as, so one suppressed expression of anger is overly submissive. The other one is overly aggressive. So it's the same quality, but inappropriately or appropriately demonstrated. So we were going to look at the shadow, because oftentimes these traits have been expressed at a certain time. Because let's say that we were in a situation, I'll give a good example, Will Smith. When he slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars, he explained that when he was there and Chris Rock was making a joke about his wife, what came up for him was that same young boy who remembered when he was young, he grew up in a household of domestic violence. He saw his father beat up his mother. You see, now at that time, suppressing his anger was essential to his survival, because as a young boy who's being, who's just dependent, if your father's being violent and you start, like getting angry, your life is in danger. So at that time, suppressing his anger for his own survival was necessary. But if we don't explore that and then recalibrate, then we get stuck with that trait as an adult. And then it comes out in other situations in an unhealthy expression. So that's where the shadow side comes from, you see? So when we don't integrate these traits, then they express themselves in the wrong way, at the wrong time, to the wrong person, to the wrong degree. It's the same trait, and if it's expressed in the right way, we admire it. The same trait expressed in the wrong way is repelling. That's the point. So one exercise was to look at the shadow. The second exercise I was looking to do was around accountability. We were going to get you to explore a time or situation. Let's see, I'll just read exactly what I wrote down on the slide. So 3 parts. This is called the accountability review. You're going to discuss specific instances where accountability was either demonstrated or lacking, and then look at why that was or wasn't there, and then try to understand the implications of that. And then the last exercise, anyway, I will share with you those two. There's another exercise I was going to do, but I just built up some exercise we could do over the next few weeks. But yeah, we'll get into those. We'll get into those next week.
And as just a final point that I wanted to, for us to pick up on next week is this idea of anger. I think one of the things that I can say that I've lacked is having examples of anger expressed to the appropriate degree. I think timing is usually can be seen as obvious or self-evident. The appropriate person can also be evident, but it's really hard sometimes to it's a nuance on the appropriate degree.
Absolutely.
And I can say for sure that I've had a lack of like examples in this area sometimes to know.
Yeah, me too. I can completely relate. And first of all, thank you for sharing that, because see, a lot of the issues come because if we haven't seen it in our childhood and in our upbringing, it's hard to know what it looks like, you see? And therefore, if the only expressions were out of balance, either too little or too much, it can even lead to a case where we're scared to express healthy assertion because we think, oh, because maybe our experiences whenever assertion was expressed, it was too much. And so it's almost like that was too much. It was overloading or terrifying. So now I'm fearful of being assertive. And then of course, that's a problem as well, because you go out into the world and you're not able to assert yourself. You can also be exploited, and then that can lead to some resentment or frustration, you know? So it's definitely something that we can discuss in more detail, maybe next week.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Just such an amazing, valuable conversation, and look forward to meeting everyone next week.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.